What's up everyone, happy Halloween. Oh, what's that? The picture's too dark for you? Well, stick it in your blogs. This is the Halloween episode today. You know what I will do though? I'll turn on my salt lamp for a bit more atmosphere. How about that? Wow, this thing really blows out the exposure on the camera. Maybe I won't. Hold on. Maybe like that. Will do. But what are we doing to celebrate Halloween this year? Well, considering I don't celebrate Halloween on this channel nearly as much as I should, this video is going to be counting down my top 10 favourite horror movies of all time. Now, horror, it's no secret, is my favourite film genre by fucking far, long shot, the best thing ever. One of the gifts from God to mankind, in my opinion, is horror movies. It's that and heavy metal. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about the spooky spooks of the cinema world. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about the movies I love so much from my favourite film genre. Let's start this shit. Obviously some of the films on this list kind of ride the line between being like horror and maybe like thriller or like action or whatever, but there's been an argument made for every film on this top 10 list to justify them and their place in the horror genre. So just keep that in mind, that you may not consider some of these films on this list to be traditional horror, like slashers or like gore horror films, but to me, these 10 horror films encapsulate everything I love about the more frightening side of cinema. So at the 10th spot, we have The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. This film is an example of a horror remake that actually works to improve based on everything that the original did. In fact, most people still to this day believe that John Carpenter's The Thing is the original film of The Thing, but no, it's not. There was one before it, and there was a remake after it, but we don't talk about that piece of shit. The John Carpenter's The Thing is honestly not just one of my favourite horror films, but one of my films full stop. The concept of the monster in this film is what really sells it for me. It's what really makes it. The paranoia behind the monster's existence just makes for great tension, causing the crew and cast to like act irrationally and really set events in motion that really make the film so iconic. The distrust among the crew, like you get to see great action, great character drama in there too, and above all else you get some seriously graphic body horror that I am just so here for in this film. The practical effects is just in another league of just film effects. I really do think so. For its time especially, it is so fucking impressive, man. And then the setting itself of the snow base really creates an isolating feeling for the movie overall, which is why The Thing is still a masterclass in creating tension all these years since its creation. It is a classic horror in the truest sense of the word. At my 9th place on the list, my 9th favourite horror film, we have Hereditary. I believe that in 20 years' time, Hereditary will be viewed as a classic horror of today. I really do think so. The main crux of this film is grief. And that's the main theme and the backbone of the story. It's a slow burn. This film is a slow burn. It's not for everybody. You hear from different sides of the camp how Marmite this film truly is. Some people get it, truly appreciate its intense eeriness, and others find it boring and not much happens until the last 10 minutes. And I totally get both sides, but for me, it really hit for me. But that's because of the repeated watchings that I had, which led to me truly understanding the genius behind this movie. Going back to the slow burn, you are rewarded for sticking through this intensely emotional and depressing film to where you get the Hammer House horror, truly brutal, fast-paced stuff in the last 10 minutes that I was mentioning. Unlike most modern horror films, this one doesn't rely on cheap jump scares and traditional like story structure or scenery. This instead uses cinematography to create bone-chilling imagery. I truly think so. The film geek in me loves how this movie was filmed from the perspective of it looking like a dollhouse from the side. This film offers a lot of shocking moments, none of which I will spoil. The dark themes and disturbing, character-led, personal horror. It is a slow burn, but it's so rewarding because you get so many chilling moments throughout it. I truly think so. I think it's one of the greats. I truly do. Moving on to my 8th place on the list of favourite horrors. This one's going to come as a surprise, but it is going to be 1922's Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. Now, this is such a film art house, like, film nerd pick, and I do apologise, you're probably eye-rolling at me for having this one in my top favourite horror films. Just based on the rubric of what I mentioned, this one is still disturbing and eerie to me. There's something so inherently unsettling about those old silent films. The eeriness is so apparent with no real need for any dialogue. The imagery is so unnerving, and the atmosphere kind of just speaks for itself in films like this, and this film particularly. You get great performances from the entire cast, really sells the horror of this thing. Granted, I did see clips of this film from a young age, and maybe that's what spooked me about it originally, which is why it maybe stuck with me for so many years till today, which is maybe why it ended up on this list. But whatever the case may be, it left an impact on me, a psychological impact. Yes, it's a very old film, but I truly implore you to try this movie for yourself before you judge. It truly does give you a eerily horrifying experience, not outwardly in your face gore, horror, jump scares. It's just more subtle. It does fit in the same way as Hereditary in some ways. It's kind of effective in those same tropes, just with very, very different film techniques of their respective times. I really believe that you should just try this movie for yourself. It's in the public domain, so it should be on YouTube, readily available for anyone to watch, really. So go for it if you're intrigued. If you're not, well, we'll move on to the 7th place, where we have a much more traditional horror film. We have Jordan Peele's Get Out as my 7th favourite horror film. This is just an excellently made film, through and through. The symbolism of its themes are so cleverly woven into the plot and imagery. People like to claim that this movie isn't even a horror, but every time I get to the last 15 minutes of this movie, I just don't understand that criticism. Also, all of the sinister and dark, like, undertones and build up towards that climax at the end, it just does give me the vibe of horror, so I don't know why people like to say that it isn't a horror film. And even if it is a psychological thriller, it still has a lot of horror movie attributes that are just unignorable. Sure, it is one of the least scary films on my list here today. The acting is sublime, the directing, the writing, the imagery. There's nothing I don't like. The cast as well, particularly Daniel Kaluuya. He's an excellent actor. Everything I've seen him in, I've been impressed by. I think it's the themes and what this film tells you that sticks with you after you've watched it, and I think that might be the effectiveness of this film incarnate, for me at least. But now we move on from my 7th favourite horror to my 6th favourite horror, where we have The Cabin in the Woods. I think it's the only horror comedy on this list, and it definitely does the best at weaving, like, the comedy elements with the serious horror elements. It's very tongue-in-cheek, but ultimately it's a love letter to the horror genre as a whole. And if it was tongue-in-cheek and taking the piss out of horror and that was that, then I wouldn't love this film. But it's the fact that it nitpicks stuff about the horror genre and takes the piss, but it is also respectful of the genre, and definitely there seems to be a deep love for horror when making this film. Sure, all the nods and gags to previous horror films are fun and all that, but it's how cleverly the story is put together, like, alongside that as well. It's a fresh new take on the horror genre, especially when you consider the time this came out. The horror genre was kind of dried up and most of the creative ideas had run out by that time, so this film coming in and shaking the bowl a bit was really well done, and you have to appreciate this film being so self-aware of the genre it's in, and yet not treading on the toes of the great horror films that came before it, but more paying homage to it, and, like I say, paying respect to that stuff. The only nitpick for me with this movie, and it doesn't ruin the movie for me because the rest of it is just so damn good, but the ending does feel a bit janky. But at the same time, I like that they didn't leave the movie open for a sequel, because if they did, it would kind of undermine the message of the film overall. So I kind of appreciate that they did end it the way they did without spoiling anything. It still does the job. But maybe if the ending was maybe delivered a wee bit better, it might have ended up higher on this list. But there you go. that was Cabin in the Woods. Now we move on to my top 5 horror films, and at the 5th spot we have Skinamarink. Yes, my film buff mind comes back in and loves the weird, cerebral, strange film art house stuff. Typical of me, I apologise. But what I will say is I have not been more unnerved watching a horror film in the last 5 years than Skinamarink. I think that I'm at that horror movie fatigue where nothing really frightens me in a bone-chilling, like spine-crawling way anymore. But Skinamarink gave me an experience like that. I bought the DVD, I sat down in this very room, chucked it on my computer, got my highest quality headphones on, turned off all the lights around me, and just sat and let the movie soak into me. And I felt the deep, intense atmosphere and the unsettling imagery. I don't know, there's some sort of magic in this movie that was previously used to make found footage horrors work for me. Obviously, found footage horror doesn't do a damn thing for me anymore, but it's that sort of magic that this film has managed to capture. There's something so minimalistic about it that just makes it so creepy, and yet there's barely anything that's outwardly horrifying or explicit besides like blood splatters or hands creeping around the corner. It more relies on showing you a creepy image and letting your imagination run wild as to what you're looking at. It's subtle and creepy. I really enjoy it. It's built a much deserved cult following, and I love the outside of the box thinking of this film, and it has truly inspired me when it comes to filmmaking in a way that other stuff hasn't really done for me in a long time. Like I said, there's just something so primally unsettling about how this film was put together for me. I know this film won't be for everyone, but for me, I really did let it soak in and really sat with it. You know what I mean? I really tried to invest into it, and I got something out of it. I got something very, very effective from it, I think. But that might just be me. Now, my 4th favourite horror film is The Strangers from 2004. This one was actually one of the first horror films I ever watched that wasn't a zombie movie. And maybe I watched it when I was a bit too young. This movie very much captures the very real horror of a home invasion. It feels so tense and frightening. Quick spoilers here for this one, but I actually really like that we don't ever find out the true identity of the titular strangers. It leaves their reasons for terrifying the unsuspecting couple like up in the air, and leaves your mind to fill the blanks, and that's where the true horror is behind their intentions, I guess. And it leaves the door open, at least in my mind, for all sorts of theories, like they could be copycat killers or something to that effect, or they could have just been terrorizing them for fun because they felt like it. I think the entire premise behind this movie is stupid strong, and though the sequels to follow it didn't quite hit the same for me, this first one really has stuck with me over these years, and I keep coming back to it to relive the sort of feeling that it gave me of just true anxiety of what a home invasion could feel like in movie form. Like, truly, it does a brilliant job at what it's trying to do. But now we move on to my top 3. My 3rd favourite spot, my film buff art house mind strikes again with The Lighthouse. I'm sorry, it's another strange out-of-the-box movie that maybe is argued to even not be a horror film, but more of a weird experimental piece. But I don't care. There are some unsettling moments in it that I would definitely consider horror. And it's also by the guy that made The Vivitch, so excuse me for confusing The Lighthouse as being an all-out horror. I certainly find things that are really fun and creepy. I think that Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe are the perfect casting for this movie. They managed to pull off really unique performances that no one's really seen from either of them before or since. It's such a surreal watch. All the imagery feels so authentic, and that could be due to the creative choice of putting it in black and white and in 4:3, which just adds to the strong element of grit and realism to the thing. I won't spoil the story, but the overall vibe and pacing of this thing, much like Hereditary and other horrors on this list, it's a slow burn, but it's so rewarding when you get to those high, intense moments of like just tension and like anxiety. It really works for me. And this film came at a time in 2019 when I really was losing inspiration of like filmmaking in general, and this kind of just was a shot in the arm for me to watch and see that like big films of today, big directors of today can make strange movies like this and it still be successful. You know, it really helped me in a lot of ways, and that might be why I love it so much, is for those reasons there. But nonetheless, I really enjoy it. Now moving on to my second favourite horror movie, we have Alien. Surprise, surprise. I think this is the most obvious pick on this list. It's either this one or number one maybe, but I fucking love Alien. Ridley Scott's masterpiece. It's iconic for a reason. Now listen, the previous Alien films, hit and miss. Mostly hits, but none of them I don't think will ever match up to the original. There was just something so genius about this first attempt. It's the best sci-fi horror for many reasons, and I love sci-fi horror, so go figure this is my second favourite on the list. Sigourney Weaver is talented beyond belief. I'll just get that out of the way. The premise is genius, and the moment-to-moment horror, deaths, and scenes overall are, like I say, iconic. The cast are all holding their own, and the fact that the monster, the xenomorph, is so synonymous with pop culture these days, and yet, unlike other horror greats like Jason or Freddy, the xenomorph has never really lost its fear factor, I think. Whereas other horror greats have maybe been watered down and maybe look goofy nowadays, I don't think the xenomorph ever has. I don't think even the Predator can say that. This being set in the deep vastness of space really creates a isolating feeling in the same way that I think the snowy climate of The Thing did as well, so that is also more points in this film's favour. There's a reason the tagline of this movie, "In Space No One Can Hear You Scream," is referenced so much, almost more often than the film itself. All those reasons I just described is why it is my second favourite horror, and it would be my number one horror if it wasn't for The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. The Shining is not just one of my favourite films, one of my favourite horror films, but it's also one of my favourite books. Stephen King is a master at writing like gripping horror, and to see his creativity mixed with Kubrick's skill of putting stuff to screen, it was just a marriage that was meant to be for this amazing film to happen. Somehow, the Overlook Hotel, the setting itself, is the most frightening thing in this movie, and there are other very frightening things that happen in this movie. Much like a lot of the other of my favourite horrors that were on this list, this one is definitely a slow burn, but goddamn is it rewarding. You get a few little small moments sprinkled in there throughout the movie of like creepy, scary moments, but it's not till the last act that's so iconic where you finally get all the payoff to all of the slow build-up in tension that this film has been seeing. And Jack's rampage at the end is just so rewarding to see, because it's just Jack Nicholson acting his heart out, being an absolute psychopath. If you thought Alien had iconic moments, forget about it. This movie is dripping with them. The twins, the maze, all work no play make Jack a dull boy. The list does just go on though, and there's even small moments in the movie that don't get talked about by other people, like the stop swinging the bat Wendy moment, or the small scenes at the bar when Jack is hallucinating ghosts, you know? Like, going back to the slow build, the rise in tension over the film is just so palpable, and the acting throughout is amazing, the scenery is gorgeous, the cinematography, the story, the everything. It is truly, I think, one of the best films of all time, and is definitely my favourite horror movie. Now I will list off the honourable mentions, all of the movies that could have probably slipped into a top 15 or top 20, but unfortunately were knocked down because the films I listed here previous are just that little bit better. So let's go through them. 28 Days Later, The Vivitch, Nope, The Babadook, Evil Dead 2, Nightmare on Elm Street, Us, The Omen, 10 Cloverfield Lane, The Blair Witch Project. All of those films are also excellent horror movies. But yeah, overall, like I said, horror is, in my opinion, the best film genre of all time. for me. It's where I get the most enjoyment out of, because I must be a masochist or something. But nonetheless, thank you for watching. It was very, very fun for me to go through and nerd out about some of my favourite movies in this video. Hope you guys have a lovely Halloween, and yeah, I guess I'll check in with you guys in another video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. Damn, maybe I should have put a jump scare at the end of this video or something. Don't know. Moment's gone.